Thank you, Victoria. And thanks for doing a great job keeping us on time. Really appreciate it. Hello, ladies. How are you? Hope everybody's doing great and excited for our final food safety journey. Before I go any further, I just wanted to ensure that you guys are thinking of this training. You are putting in the time. I know it's a lot of time commitment. You've had a full day and now we expect you to come for another 2 hours and be active and participate and remember. But if you get the time and as you go through it and you think about your business and you think about you, think about the interconnectivity between all of the sessions, because the beauty of this program is that it will give you a holistic approach on how you manage your business, whether it's agro-processing, whether you're doing a regular farm, or whether you have a backyard garden. You find the links in between, or whether you're a teacher, regardless, there's something for everyone. And I hope you take this as the comprehensive approach that it's intended to do. After the food safety part, you will get the financial literacy, which I'm sure a lot of you will be interested in. I've listened to her and she's really, really good and lots of information there, not only for the farm, but just like the food safety and the others, but where you can use it personally. So I hope you guys take that into consideration. Before we go in, we had Latoya, I think it was 2 or 1 person had volunteered to do a summary for us.
Well, I have 2 names here. I have Akisha and I have Sherry Dan, I think. Sherry, and I hope it's not the 2 names from the previous class. So I have Akisha and
Thank you, ladies. Are you guys there? Thanks. First of all, I really appreciate you guys stepping up and doing this. And Natalia, sorry for talking over you. I thought you were finished. Okay, so who wants to go first? Okay,
hello.
Hi, Sheridan.
Hi.
How are you? Akisha, we'll come right back to you.
Well, thanks.
Okay, so thank you for volunteering to do a quick summary for us from the last session. Go ahead.
Okay, so the last session, we covered the introduction to good agricultural practices. We looked at the benefits of implementing good agricultural practices and the principles when we implement these good agricultural practices. It says, good agricultural practices help to maximize yields and optimize our business. Under this topic, we also look at animal health, milking hygiene, and feeding and watering our animals. We also said that it's very important for us to take good care of our animals, the welfare of the animals and the environment. We touched on the recognizing the benefits that you could get from implementing these good agricultural practices. And we said that once produce gets contaminated, it's very difficult to remove the contamination. It's difficult or almost impossible. We touched on the 4 pillars: economic viability, the environmental stability, the social acceptability, and the food safety and its quality. We said that there were 6 main routes of contamination, which were feces. You could get contamination from clothing, hands, touching stuff, footwear, tools and equipment, illness and injury. And I think we did mention that the illness and injury is basically a two-bucket disease.
It can be a two-bucket disease, and the two-bucket disease means you have both diarrhea and you're throwing up.
Yes, at the same time.
Yeah, it's not fun.
No. So then we went on to look at the benefits derived from implementing good agricultural practices. We said that it improves food safety and it enhances crop quality, and it increases access to various markets.
Yeah.
And it also provides sustainable farming practices. We look at the 5 overviews of implementing these policies. We also look at hygiene and sanitation. We said it's very important to look at our water quality and use. We touch on a bit of waste management, soil and crop management. We also looked up on packaging and labeling. We went over harvesting of the crops. We look at post-harvesting and post-harvesting handling of the crops. We also said that it's very important that we don't use the same tools to harvest them. I don't remember, but I remember something about not using the same tools and color coding.
Right, so not using, it's to avoid cross-contamination.
Cross-contamination.
Yes. We don't use the same wheelbarrow we use for transporting manure, and without washing or cleaning it, using it to transport fresh produce, something like that. So good.
Right. We also look at the getting a third-party audit for verification purposes and oversight and enforcement of good agricultural practices. We said that there are some challenges associated with implementing good agricultural practices. We touched on the ISO, which is this International Organization for Standardization and local markets. We said basically food safety rules does not change, is implementing the rules. So we look at some challenges that we face when implementing these rules, like lack of financial support, increasing cost of production, record keeping challenges, and water and soil testing and getting the certification, making sure that the soil testing is done by a reputable source. We look at how the ways to implement, to develop the GAP plan. And we said that it's very important that we train our workers and we maintain proper records of our activities. And we should continue to improve on the way that we do things, developing. We also said that developing good agricultural practices is not a one size fits all. We have to tailor the plan to our specific needs. We went on to talk about how we lay out the farm to prevent cross-contamination. we should organize the farm for efficiency. We touch on cleaning and sanitizing to reduce cross contamination, and we also looked at ways to kill bacteria. We touched on how we package stuff and label them. And we said it's very important to keep the tools off of the ground.
Well,
Sorry?
I think that is a very comprehensive summary. And so I thank you for listening. I hope everybody got something out of it.
And we touch on traceability and.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I didn't know you were not finished. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry.
Great. No, sorry. Thank you for this comprehensive summary.
Food safety plan.
Yes. Okay.
That's all I remember.
That's a lot, more than I expected. So thank you.
Okay.
We have Akila. You want to add anything to that?
No. She said a lot, mostly what I was going to say. So yes.
That's a good sign. That means everybody's on the same page, right? So thank you to both of you for volunteering. So today we have a full schedule. I am still gonna try to leave on time for those who want to leave, but as always, I'm gonna be available for another half hour if anybody wants to stay on with any questions, that burning question that you have. And even after the course is over, you have access to reach out to me through Helen's Daughters for any question in food safety that's related to your farm, your personal business, or any consulting for such a short period of time through Helen's Daughters at no cost. Okay, so today, I think all of you was able to get the food safety, the learning journal. Did everybody get it? If there's somebody who still haven't received it, then reach out to Latoya. But it is a document that we have found to be very productive. And it's not just for food safety. As you go through all of it, it has learning logs. So it's for your own benefit. So you can capture the key learnings and you can have a document that you can go back and refer to. Again, documentation, in God we trust, everybody show paper is critical. So what we are going to do today, I'm not gonna spend a lot of time to go through it. I'm assuming that you guys had a chance to look at the food safety section of the log. Latoya is gonna put it for us. It starts on, I think, slide 17, Latoya. So for what I want everybody to do, whether you have a garden, whether you have a farm, when I sometime take a look at this processing assessment and basically document where you are on any of those items that we touched on. So that's your way too, of whether you do the plan or not, but it's a great way for you to say, hey, where I am, and then to also to share that with potential clients that you are going to sell to. Remember, doing this course, it's a way of empowering the women to be able to show up, and when you do your marketing, that you have something that is legit. So take your time, go through this, and whether you have a backyard or a farm or agro-processing applies. Next one. Same thing here. I'm not going through the question. I just want you guys to know what it is. Take your time and just go through them. Keep going. Now, I also give each one, you'll find example of what should be included in your farm food safety plan. So you will have examples. Not all of them will apply, but as you go through this, you will see examples. Keep going. So now, after you've done your assessment, your next step should be your farm food safety plan. plan to import, export, or just sell to the local business? And you can show them that, or even the bank. If you go for a loan at the bank and you put that forward, hopefully they will look at it and see the validity of your farm and be able to do some grants or a loan or whatever the financial help will get to. So you have to put in the name of your business, your contact person. If you don't have a name, just put your name on there as the sole proprietor, and then fill out that form. Next slide. Again, you'll have your assessment. So what is your assessment? You already had that, you carried over here. Now keep going. That's a continuum. Now here. So in this, I gave you an example of what good looks like, right? So if I have management area, when you do your assessment, this will give you an example of what's the best practice based on your assessment. And then this, if you go to the last column where it says need improvements, and based on your answer, you can determine where you are in your farm and what you need to progress it. I will tell you, very few farms have best practice across the board. Everybody has some work, even on the developed countries, they have work that needs to be done. Okay. And again, more examples, so you're not left alone to figure it out. Just say, here's what good looks like and where I am. And here's yours to help you fill out your form based on your data. Remember I said each farm, each location is very different. And this is for, it says for the farm, but you can also use it for agro-processing, and we'll show you, you can add the HACCP plan to it. It's also applicable. And if you already have something that you are using, don't throw it away. Just see where this complement, is there something there that you're not using now that you can add to yours? So don't throw away if you have something. But if you don't have anything, use this as a guide. Feel free to use this as a guide. And now this section, each of you at each section in the journal has a learning log. That's for your information. I urge you to take a look after each session, because when we learn things, it's fresh in our memory. That's why we do the summaries, and we know that. And so take your time after each section and try to do the learning log. So that's your summary of the Farm Food Safety Plan. If as you go through it and you find you have any questions, you can reach out to Helen's daughters and they will get the information to me and I will get back to you. And I try to do a quick turnaround, like within a day that I get the information back to you. Okay. So we can move on to the presentation because I'm not seeing any questions or any hands. I know we went through this quickly, but for you guys to go through them. So as again, I'm going to turn off my camera so I'm not distracted and I'll come back on. So today, go back to the next slide. Just our last session, one more. So here's what we're going to try to cover today. So we're going to do organic versus natural. We'll talk about good GMO, genetically modified organism. That's the long name for it. We'll talk about gluten, which I know a lot of you have heard about it. Gluten, everybody's gluten-free. Everybody wants non-GMO, but they don't know really what it means. So we'll touch on that. We'll touch a little bit about certification. We talked a little bit in GAP, but we'll talk about other broad certifications available. We will touch a little on foreign supplier verification. And what that is if you are intending to be a supplier, whether it's for herbs, for coconut, for lettuce, to anywhere else, there's a big push on requirements for foreign supplier verification as part of the US Food Safety Modernization Act Canada has one, Europe has one, so there's a strong push on getting approval from foreign suppliers. And then we'll do a HACCP overview, which is a more detailed overview, more applicable to manufacturing and to agro-processing. Okay? Okay, sorry, ladies. So let's look at organic. Next slide. Before I go to next. Sorry. By either a yes or a no or a thumbs up, how many people believe they're growing or they have an organic farm? You could say 1 yes or 2 no.
No.
No. No. Okay. So a lot of people use the word organic and all natural to be the same. What we will learn today is it's very different. Now, Khadijah Williams says yes. Khadijah, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit about what makes your farm organic? Khadijah? You can put it in the chat or you can unmute and talk. Khadijah. Don't be shy. Okay, she said we do not use any chemicals. That's a great first start, but let's come back and look at what it is to be organic, and then we will, I want you to come back and say, are you still organic, okay? So all natural does not equal organic. There's a lot of stuff that's all natural. Ganja is all natural. There's a lot of teas and herbs that's all natural, but they're not organic. Anyone can use this label and it's not regulated. So there's no regulation. Anybody can say all natural. Ingredients from nature are considered natural, even though they are processed. High fructose corn syrup is considered all natural. And if you know the process that it goes through to make high fructose corn syrup, and high fructose corn syrup is that processed corn syrup. It is so highly processed, but it's natural. No regulation on treatment of animals and what they are fed. So your animals don't have to follow any regs. Versus organic, next slide. Next slide. The other way. Yeah. So organic, to be considered organic farm or organic products, it is regulated with strict requirements. Now, the more common one, Valerie Thompson, doesn't corn syrup comes from GMO corn. We'll talk about that in a little bit, not all of them. Only use, so on organic, you have to only use approved organic farming methods, and we'll go about that a little bit of some of the requirements. I was saying most regions have the same requirements with modification. I couldn't find any organic standards for the Caribbean when I searched. There might be, I just couldn't find it. And I didn't find definitely nobody stopping anybody from calling their products organic. So organic has no GMO, genetically modified organism, growth hormones or antibiotics allowed, and the livestock, the animal must be fed organically and treated humanely. So if you are going to have organic chicken, we have to have it free range, for example. So as you can see, all natural is not considered organic. But I'm sure a lot of you have seen a lot of products called organic. Next slide. You can keep clicking. So organic farming requires the crops, the pests, the weeds, and disease must be controlled primarily through management practices, including physical, mechanical, and biological control. Now, you will see as we go through, it doesn't say that you cannot use pesticide. It's the pesticide that you have to use, the very few has to be approved pesticide. And there's a list that, that you can find. Next slide.
Okay, we have Akisha with her hands up.
Hi, Akisha.
Hi. I learned from someone, and you can verify that to me, in order to be certified as organic, you have to be within a 3-mile radius of anyone that does not spray with pesticides, herbicides, or so forth. So now, example, where I live, large farm, they use pesticides and herbicides. So even if I want to say I'm organic, based on the rules, they say I cannot classify my things as organic just because of the 3-mile radius thing. Is that true?
That is 100% correct. And we'll touch a little bit about that. And that's just one of the requirements because of runoffs of air pollutant that might interfere in your land on your farm. So that pesticide might have runoff from the water from that other farm, especially if it's if you're down below it. But yes, that's one of the requirements. And we'll show even some more restriction. It's very, very restrictive. Okay, but that's a good call out. Thank you, Akisha. Next slide. So here's some of the standards, right? Land must be free of prohibited substances for at least 3 years. So Akisha, not only can you not be 3-mile radius, but you have to prove that the land that you are using is free of the prohibited substances. So it's like the Roundup or whatever that you are using, that you have to demonstrate that. And if you want to get that certification, you must test and show that you were tested, and you get audited to show that, yes, you are truly 3 years. Now, I know that is a big barrier for us in the Caribbean because we don't have that luxury to have land that we can let stay for 3 years without prohibited substances. We might, but it becomes a barrier, not only for the Caribbean, but from other developing countries, because you might have just one little piece of land that you need to apply things to, and you don't have that luxury. In some cases, they have what they call verified organic. You'll see some of that certification. Basically, what they're allowing the farmers to do is do a stepwise process. So you're not fully organic, but they're showing that you have a stepwise process. So maybe you have 2 years free, and they will give you that step as long as you show that you can move forward to a full organic. So 3 years, that's one big barrier. Next slide. Your soil fertility and crop nutrients must be managed through crop rotation and cover crops. And I think Mikey Ross talked about that in his presentation. You have to do tillage and cultivation practices. So this is a lot of manual work that you have to do. That's because you cannot use any unapproved pesticide. Everything has to be all pesticide free. I remember I was about to say all natural, but not all natural, pesticide free. Okay? So it's very manual. Or mechanical, I should say. If you have a big farm, you can do the rotation, a tiller, there's automatic tillers, right? Okay, keep going. Here's a doozy. Now, and when you use seeds, your seeds that you use and other planting stock has to be organic. Now, I have found only a few places that I have searched in the Caribbean. I know in St. Lucia, I couldn't find any, where you can buy organic seeds. And organic seeds have to follow the same requirements that you have for organic farming. They have to be proven that they've grown in a land that was 3 years free of pesticide, that they grew in a farm that was 3 miles, there was nothing 3 miles adjacent to them that used pesticide. And so those seeds, for you to have organic food, it goes as far back as the seed. Okay, so when we think about organic, now this is for you to get certification, for you to be certified organic. And I've been told in the past workshops that, well, why would I do that? Because it's not financially advantageous for me to do that. And that may be the case, but in the other developed countries, or if you go into the stores, you are paying a premium for the organic label. So farmers who have organic certified, USDA certified organic, or the Canadian or Europe one, you catch a premium price for it. Okay. So advantages for it: organic farms reduce greenhouse gas emission. It's more environmentally friendly for sustainability, I think somebody mentioned, yes. And then it supports healthier soil and pollinators. So what we are having, one issue we are having is we're not getting the bees to pollinate anymore because of some of the pesticide is killing them. And then we have to force ourselves to use different areas. But if you do proper organic, you are increasing the soil and the pollinators. Next slide. It's more energy efficient, no chemical resistant to pests and disease. Established organic farms are less vulnerable to risks because, again, you're not eroding your soil and you are managing it in a sustainable way. It doesn't use genetically modified food items, and we'll talk about that. And a healthy environment for farmers to work in, because the farmers are not breathing in all those pesticides and it's not creating an issue for them. So those are all the plus sides of organic farming. The disadvantage of organic farming, it's cost. It adds cost, it adds time. And eventually, if you're in an area or you're selling it, you can get premium for your produce. But for small farmers and for the underdeveloped countries, it becomes a burden because of the cost. We have to find well-designed methods to compete with conventional farming. It's so much easier to spray pesticides versus finding natural approved pesticide. You have more of that. It's easier to drop that in versus finding somebody to till it for you naturally. You don't have to wait the 3 years. You don't have to worry about the farmer up down the hill. So it's challenging. Akia, this one requires the buffer zone with neighboring conventional farms. That's what you were talking about. Exactly right. And it's generally more labor intensive because you are doing a lot of manual work to get the weed and the cover crops. Next slide. So, food safety, what do you think food safety applies here? Anybody? From what we've learned for food safety, is there a role in food safety, or are there different practices because we go into organic? Anybody wants to touch on that? So we talked about what it takes for organic farming. So we learned about the food safety principles about GAP. Do you think GAP applies on organic farms?
Yes.
Yeah. And so actually GAP fits very well in it. You still have your food safety culture. So food safety is the umbrella, no matter if you're doing organic, natural, or conventional farming. Or as long as you do food, you will always, always, always be dealing with food safety and the prevention of it. Okay, next slide. So any additional questions on what we've just touched on organic? Any surprises? Okay, so are we still organic and all natural? Okay, nobody's talking today. We'll move on because everybody's all natural and all organic. So let's move on to genetically modified organism, GMO. So I want to have a little discussion, and when people hear GMO, what does that mean to you? Besides it giving you an extra eye, an extra head. When you hear non-GMO or GMO-free, what does GMO signify to you? Anybody wants to tell me what, when they hear GMO, what is associated with it? You can put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand or just speak out. Anybody?
When I hear GMO, I'm just thinking something that someone in a lab messed with or interfered with.
Yes, that is the prevailing thought, that somebody went and created something in the lab. Anybody else? Anybody has a different point of view of when they heard GMO? I think on artificial, thank you, Daniela, made in a lab barrel. So you guys are right on. So today, I'm gonna try to debunk some of the myth about GMO, and I'm gonna tell you my personal opinion. I believe that the scientists did not do a good job when they introduced GMO to the benefit. So when they developed GMO, they did not put it out there, the news media and everybody gave it a really bad name. But when I look at the hunger and the amount of people that we are going to have to feed, and when we think about what GMO is doing, and is gonna enable us to have enough food to feed people, them to survive, the risk and the myth about it, somebody playing God, it gives you pause. Because I think for us to be able to provide food for all of us and to survive some of this drought and the increasing population in the world, there is a place for GMO. But that's me as a scientist. And I'm gonna try to give you the facts and you can make your own opinion, okay? And thank you for everyone who gave me their point of view. because that's exactly what everybody thinks about GMO. So let's go to the next slide. So GMO is genetically modified organism, is a plant, animal, or microorganism that has had its genetic material changed. So when you guys said it's in the lab, yes, its material in the lab has changed. The genetic engineering generally involves the specific modification of the DNA, including the transfer of a specific DNA from one cell to another. So how many people do crossbreeding in their farming, or your father or somebody else have crossbreed plants? Are you guys, people do crossbreeding, right?
Yes.
Yes, so does that raise red flags?
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
It does? Yeah. So it becomes something that we used to, we do it manually, it takes longer. But in this world where we are, basically what they're doing is they're taking that that idea of, is that grafting, like the grafting the plant? Yes, Keisha, that is like grafting the plant. But it's done in the lab. It's the same theory, but scientists have gone in the lab and they've manipulated it, and it goes faster than it would if you do it like you do traditional crossbreeding. So that's exactly what it is. It's your traditional crossbreeding on steroids, if you want a different way of looking at it. Okay, next slide. So the GMO crops have had genes added to them for various reasons, such as improving their growth. So if you have a crop, a corn, species of corn that grows better in one condition. So what they've done in the lab is they've taken the seeds or the genes in that crop and did the crossbreeding with it with another corn type that allows that corn species then to be able to grow just as well as that one crop. So they're taking the genes from that crop, transferring it to another crop, and so now you have more crops that can grow better. They also do it for nutritional content, which again, you can transfer if you have more nutrients from one crop to another, you can transfer that to the gene, the transplant, or the crossbreeding, but they're doing it in the lab and putting it back into that plant and growing it as a normal one. They're doing it, it's more sustainable, and pest resistant is a big one. So if you have a breed of corn, and that's why I think it's not, you have all the things opposite of organic. So you are building this brand and you are adding a pest resistance. So if you have a crop that's demonstrated is resistance to pest, you will take that gene from that crop, the DNA, and add it to all your other crops and give them that pest resistant gene. And then it also ease of farming, because then you don't have to worry about some of the other things that you would have to worry about in organic. So think about that. This is what happened when you do GMO crops. It's transplanting, it's grafting in the lab. So they are breaking down those cells from another plant or another organism, putting into another one and making it better. Next slide. So according to the World Health, are they safe? According to WHO, no effects on human health have been shown as a result of consumption of the GMO foods. by the general population in countries where they have been approved. And somebody mentioned corn. Yeah, corn is the #1. Corn and soy. The US have a lot of corn and soy that's genetically modified. In Europe, you cannot use any genetically modified foods. And so you have this disparity. But there's no scientific proof that this is causing people to grow extra eyes, extra hair, extra head, anything like that. Next slide. So and we talked about is crossbreeding. So selective breeding, it takes longer. It's difficult to determine which genetic change led to the new trait. So if you put a red flower like hydrangeas, you take it, you have a pink one and a yellow one, and you want a pink and yellow mixed red. And I think so, I'm not sure, but you know what I'm going. And you put that in there, you crossbreed it, you don't know what you did or how it came about. It's random. In the lab, if they do it, they know exactly what genes, what piece of DNA that transfers, so it's reproducible. And they can do it quickly once they find the right DNA pieces to match them. Next slide. So what are the pros of GMO? And there are some pros, they're not all bad. So accelerate this process using scientific techniques to achieve the desired traits. So like I said, instead of you waiting and randomly waiting for it to happen, it's being managed. One of the most GMO crop is BT corn. And that's a lot of the corn used in the US. It's modified to produce insecticide toxin, which makes the corn resist insects and pests. And it reduces the need for pesticides. So you don't have to add pesticide again because it's not gonna impact the corn. And it comes from a naturally occurring bacteria known as Bacillus thuringiensis. So what they're doing is they found a bacteria, in this case, that's naturally occurring, like a salmonella or something else, but this one bacteria has been proven to be resistant to pests. So in the lab, they've isolated that gene, that piece of DNA that makes this bacteria resistant to pests, and incorporated it into corn. And then that corn species, when grown, incorporating that bacteria DNA, now that corn becomes resistant to pests. The pros, again, is sustainability. Genetic engineering, also known as biotechnology, drives sustainability. It allows farmers to improve and preserve the soil because you're not adding all those pesticides as you grow. It indirectly reduces greenhouse gas emission. Farmers don't need to spray their fields as often as we talked about because you don't have that issue with pests. And it actually has a higher yield, survives stressful conditions such as drought, and resists diseases like blights. So when I talked about starvation and how many people are going to go hungry, and the number of people that are going hungry, if you have those opportunities where you have no demonstrated side effects to the human being, nobody has grown eyes, nobody has died because of that, I think we have to think about, do we let people die from starvation, or is that an alternate method to help with the food supply? Next slide. And again, some of the concerns around GMO involve allergies, cancer, environmental issues. Again, this is not proven. Keep going. So for allergies, there's no report of allergic reaction to GMO foods currently in the market. So people worry about, they say, if I have genetically modified food, I'm gonna have an allergic reaction. No documented case of somebody getting an allergic reaction from consuming GMO food. And this is not just said, this is by the World Health Organization. Next slide. So the main concern around GMO from allergy, there was one study in the 90s found that adding a protein from Brazil nuts to GMO soybean could trigger an allergic reaction in people sensitive to Brazil nuts. So this one where you had the mixing of the nuts. After the scientists discovered this, they quickly abandoned that GMO food. So that's where the concern about allergies came back in the 90s. And it makes sense because nuts, if you have allergy to nuts and you eat another nut product, then that will become a concern. But if you go back one slide, if I'm allergic to, the risk here is bad, because if I'm allergic to Brazil nuts, I probably would stay away from another nut type, but less likely to stay away from soybeans. So that will increase the risk. Okay, next slide. Again, cancer, an early mice study linked GMO intake to a higher risk of tumors and early death. However, this study was later retracted because it was poorly designed. So the scientific method used was disproved by a lot of the scientists. And currently, no human research ties GMO intake to cancer. And there is no evidence that eating GMO will change your DNA. It doesn't automatically change it. You have to create it for it to change it. DNA doesn't just jump from one cell to the other. It has to be manufactured. Okay, next. This one, most crops are resistant to herbicides such as Roundup. This means that the farmers use Roundup without fear of it harming their crops. A growing number of weed then becomes resistant to this herbicide over time. And so then that creates an issue because the weed have developed resistance because the farmer overused it. And now there's nothing to kill that weed except you have to do it manually. Okay. Okay, this led to even more Roundup being sprayed on crops to kill the resistant weed because they can affect the crop harvest. Roundup and its active ingredient, glyphosate, are very controversial because animals and test tube studies have linked them to various diseases. So that's that concern there. Now, this is a big one. There has also been concern that the pollen from the BT crop may negatively impact the honeybees. People believe that because the BT crop is pollinated through the genetically modified cells, that it doesn't attract the honeybees. But there hasn't seemed to be any solid evidence to support that yet, but watch out. So on 1 second, let me take this. In the long run, that GMO thing will be determined to be heirloom seeds crop. No one has the right to determine that a crop of heirloom must be cross-pollinated by the GMO pollen of another farm. GMO is profit-driven more than humanitarian. That is Valerie's point of view. Thank you, Valerie. Okay, GMO are food that have been modified using genetic techniques. Most foods in your local supermarket contains GMO ingredients because they're easier and more cost-effective for farmers, which make them cheaper for consumers. In the United States, food grown using GMO techniques, including soybean, soybean, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa, cotton, potatoes, papaya, pink pineapple, summer squash, and a few varieties of apple. Some of the approved foods in the US that has GMO, and not all of them are labeled. So you might be using GMO food in your market. So that's where we are on GMO. Now, this information is not to change your mind, it's not to give you different ideas, it's not to make you a GMO believer. It's to inform you of the data so we can make informed decisions. And that's all that is. Because we talk about GMO and a lot of us don't know the source of it or how it comes about. Okay. Thank you for that, GMO. Next one, we'll move on. Yes, one minute if anybody has another burning question on what we've learned about GMO. Any surprises, any clarity required at this time? It sits very well with everybody. That's good. Lorenzina, this is very interesting because some products are carefully labeled no GMO. Yes, again, we have to be careful when it says no GMO. It's just like people will label organic. A lot of people will put non-GMO on their products and they don't even know. Okay. Okay, we'll move on. Again, if you guys have questions, feel free. Our next hot topic is gluten. So gluten became a trend, a very dangerous trend, because there are people, my nephew, who is highly gluten sensitive. He almost lost his life because of it. So like allergy, it's not an allergen, it's different. It's a sensitivity, but for people who have gluten, it could be dangerous. However, it became a trend and it became an issue for the people that actually cannot tolerate gluten. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Desiree said she will have to grow her own and eat it. That's always the best thing if you can. I agree with that. So what is gluten? Gluten is a protein that's found in the wheat plant, and some other grains. It's naturally occurring. There we go, the word naturally, not organic, naturally, but it can be extracted, concentrated, and added to food and other products to add protein texture and flavor. So that's what gluten is, a protein found in wheat plant and some other grains. Next slide. For people who have a sensitivity to gluten, protease is an enzyme that helps our body process the protein, but it can't completely break down gluten. Undigested gluten makes its way to the small intestine. Most people can handle the undigested gluten with no problem. That's the majority of the population. There's a small part of the population that gluten can trigger a severe autoimmune response or other unpleasant symptoms, like my nephew. He has really severe reaction. In one case, he went undetected and got him really, really sick. Next slide. Celiac disease, you may have also heard, is an immune reaction to eating gluten, a protein found in the wheat, barley, and rice. Eating gluten-containing foods will trigger responses in the small intestine. So people who have sensitivity to gluten are called celiacs. They have celiac disease. Over time, this reaction damages the small intestine lining, which was what's happening to my nephew, and they didn't know about it. can cause diarrhea, fatigue, and weight loss. So if you are celiac and you have gluten sensitivity, and you will know it. It's no joke. But again, the good thing is it's a small population of people that have it. Next slide. So on gluten, let me talk a little bit about that. So I told you what it is, why it's dangerous. The problem that caused and that everybody wanted gluten-free, just like non-GMO. But then it became such a problem, the people who had the celiac disease could not find food that was gluten-free because everybody else was consuming it. And then it made the availability of what they could eat and where they could find it so much more expensive because everybody went on that big trend of gluten-free. And so they couldn't have it. Now, everybody will say they have gluten-free, and some people have sensitivity. You feel bloated when you eat bread, right? You eat a hot piece of bread, people say when they eat carbs, they feel bloated, but it doesn't mean that you are sensitive, you are celiac. It just means you have a sensitivity if it doesn't continue, okay? So that was, we talked about gluten, we talked about GMO, and then we talk about organic and all natural. So all the things that we think about, even if you're not in a full-fledged farm at home and for your personal use, same thing. Now, the other thing I wanted to touch about a little bit was certification. So it doesn't matter if I do food safety and I might be doing it right, you might be doing it right because you know you're producing food and you do the right thing. Food safety is about do no harm. That's what we should always think about. When we produce food, our number one principle should be do no harm. And so one way of doing that is, because not everybody can police themselves, is certification. And certification is a means of holding people accountable, as well as giving our customers and our consumers a level of confidence that the food that we are feeding them was produced under good manufacturing practices, good GAP practices. So we'll talk about a few of the certification. Now, I know there is not a lot of requirement if you are making food locally, except you have to have a health check. If you know of any certification that's required locally, put it in the chat for me for SKN, but I wasn't able to find a lot. Or any for that matter, except you have to have a health check, the health inspector check. I forgot the name of it, but something like that. But if you want to export or import food, then certification becomes a barrier or a requirement. Next slide. So those are some of the, so you can pull all of them up. So those are some of the certification. FFSC 2200. It's basically an audit of all of your programs that, especially if you are in agro-processing. So most of those would be for agro-processing and manufacturing. FFSC is for manufacturers and agro-processors, not for farms. GMP certification, good manufacturing practices, can also apply on the farm, right? But for farmers, your number one certification is the good agricultural practices. And that's an audit. It's a long, long, long process to get that audit. And then you have HACCP certification. Now, I did not put organic certification because organic certification is not a requirement for food safety. It's for quality, because your food safety applies no matter what. So those are some of the common ones. GMP certification should apply no matter where you are. It's good manufacturing practices. It's everything we've been learning about to make food. But in the Caribbean and Africa and those places, it's not a requirement. Okay. Now, SQF is the most common third-party audit certification. So not only that you can't do your own certification, if you were saying my farm is GAP approved, you need to have somebody come and audit you and give you that certification to tell you that you are GAP approved. So the British Retail and Consortium, the BRC, and AIB are the three biggest certification companies that you have. So the baking one, AIB, somebody tried to use them across the board, but some of the restrictions for AIB, because it's a big good, it's not applicable for produce, and people use it for produce, and then they had a big recall because of infestation and because of moisture causing microorganisms to grow. So you have to be careful how you interchange them. Next slide. ISO, again, another system. ISO, there's the ISO group, there's BRC, all of those, 2200, FFSC, those are all a category of third-party audits that you can use for a certification. Either one of those will go. Now, when I worked for Kellogg or Kraft, if you want to be a supplier, I wouldn't even talk to you unless you had one of the ISO or FFSC certification. That was just the cost of doing business with those companies. They wouldn't even talk to you unless you had that. Okay. Next slide. So Food Safety Modernization Act. Now this, I think most of you may have heard of it. It's called FSMA. President Obama, when he first was elected in the United States, he created this sweeping law because of the number of children that was dying from foodborne illnesses in the US and around the areas. So he regulated the food system on how people are growing food. He put a lot of the onus back on big manufacturers, but also on suppliers. I was integral in helping develop the food safety plan. So it wasn't just the regulators, the food manufacturers, the farmers, everybody else got to put this plan together. Now, is it a good plan? Yes. Is it conducive for third world or underdeveloped countries? It's a burden because the underdeveloped countries don't have the resources to apply that. However, if you want to sell food to the developing countries, Canada, US, the rest of the world, from those countries, you have to show proof of that. The elements of the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA, is your agricultural water has to meet a certain standard. You have to have a third-party certification. Remember, we talked about food traceability is a big one. You need to show one step forward, one step backward. So you need to show, okay, if I'm buying this food, where did it come from and where is it going? Now, I put this in red, foreign supplier verification, and that's where it's going to impact anybody in the Caribbean or Africa or underdeveloped countries who want to sell food to the developed countries as a supplier. You have to prove that you have a supplier verification program. It also put the onus on the developed countries. So for example, Kellogg is buying cocoa from somebody in SKN. The government will hold Kellogg responsible if that supplier doesn't meet the verification requirements. So what does Kellogg do? The Kellogg will turn it down on the cocoa supplier and say, Mr. Cocoa Supplier, I don't care how you get this done, But if I'm gonna buy food for you, I need you to give me all of the requirements from that verification program. So you see how that works. The next one is laboratory accreditation for analysis of food. So if you are going to, 1 second, sorry about that. The lab accreditation, you have to show that you're in an approved lab. So if you're doing water testing, that water testing lab has to be verified that it's approved, that you have mitigation strategies to protect against adulteration. So a lot of the foods that we make outside, like olive oil, for example, we know olive oil, it says 100% olive oil, but it's contaminated. Spices, we say the spices are 100% something, and it's not. People put plastic in rice, and all of those. Adulteration becomes a big issue because of money. And you have to have preventive controls for human foods. So preventive controls mean you have, remember we talked about not after the fact. The goal of FSMA was to do prevention. And that's what we talked about. How do you prevent your produce from getting contaminated? Because you can't clean it. After the fact, it's too late. And there's a whole section in there for produce safety because of the number of recalls that's been in place, the number of deaths associated with people eating unsafe produce, and then the fact that you cannot decontaminate the produce because there's no kill step once it gets cross-contaminated. And because of the texture, it's harder to sanitize it. Okay, so those are the key elements of FSMA. And I put it on there because I know you have some agro-processors in the group. I know it doesn't apply to anybody who's doing backyard farming, and it doesn't apply to anybody who is selling food locally. But I wanted to give you that piece of information because in the past, some people have been exporting or importing food. Next slide. 1 second, Abigail, what is a kill step? A kill step is a process, whether it's cooking, heating, or drying, that will get rid of a bacteria, or sanitizing. So that's a process that eliminates potential bacteria on food. So that's what a kill step is, but mostly it's cooking or processing. Or when they do the canning, a canning gets recorded, it goes into a big, like a big oven, the food gets cooked in it, it dries out the bacteria. If it's processed properly, then that's the kill step. Good question, thank you for that. So we'll go quickly against exporting requirement. Next, keep going. Now I put the US, but then you can find, I have references in there and you can find it for all different countries, but for simplicity, I did US. Register your facility with the US Food and Drug Administration. This does not apply to farmers, which is the good thing. So if you're gonna sell farm products, if you sell bananas, or you sell mangoes, or you sell watermelon, directly to the US, it doesn't require you to register your facility. If, however, on your farm, you're gonna turn this mango into mango juice or agro-processed product, then that facility, if it's attached to your farm or separate, for you to be able to sell it to the US and other countries, you have to show that that facility is approved and you get a registration number for that facility before you can sell the food. Most people, if they are selling food to the US, they use a US food agent to handle that because the agents already know. It's like when you send a barrel and you want to clear a barrel, there's somebody out there that, there's some people that do that. Instead of you going, you have some people that you can pay to do that. And they can get all the permits for you and you don't have to do it yourself. But a big thing that a lot of products that get shipped to the US gets rejected for, and I say US and the other countries, at the border is testing for unapproved pesticide. And when I used to do products for Kellogg, 1 out of every 10 shipments of spices were rejected from around the world because of undetected pesticides. So that's a big thing. If you were thinking about that, make sure your pesticide is on the approved list. And there's a list of approved pesticide, whether you're doing conventional farming or agro-processing, or whether you are doing organic. Next slide. And labeling, again, a big one for rejecting it. If you have none of organic, make sure organic is right. And your ingredient label too becomes important. So if you have to put mango chutney, make sure that everything you have on your label is approved and it's on that list for mango chutney. If they test it and something you didn't say you had pepper in there and somebody find pepper in it, it gets rejected. Okay. So another quick one is prior notice. If you are going to ship to the US or other countries, you need to notify them that you intend to send the product. And basically what it does, it gives them a heads up so they know what to do and your paperwork goes easier. You have your shipper information, your carrier method of transportation, whether it's by sea or by air, and then they will give you a code that you will put on there. But again, like I said, most people, if they are going that route, they have that information and they have an agent who knows the process, will do that for them because it's very time intensive. Next slide. We talked about that. We can keep going. So I'm going to stop for a minute. I'm not going to do the Jeopardy right now, but let's do this one first. And let's stop and ask any question in everything we've discussed earlier, whether it's the certification, any question that you have on those topics. I'll take a few minutes and we can have a discussion. So question, opinion, anything that you can help us learn from. What certification do you have in SKN? Melissa Pemberton. Yes, you have the floor.
So when it comes to the organic versus natural, for someone who plants in containers and the containers are made out of plastic, would that have anything to affect whether you can say it's natural or organic? Because the plastic is something that's man-made, and I don't know if that will affect it. So what are your thoughts on that, please?
You know, I've never had that question. Excuse me, but it's a good one. I think you would have to prove that the plastic doesn't have any prohibited substances, which is hard to do because plastic, we know, has a lot of prohibited substances in it, right? So for you to say organic and to get the organic, now this is for you to say organic certification. If you've had your organic seeds, your organic everything, the plastic, you'd have to ensure that it doesn't have chemicals that can leach into your product. And that's going to be hard to find.
So basically, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So basically, it will be challenging to prove that it's organic if you put it in a plastic container. I don't know of any plastic that don't have prohibited substances in it.
So it sounds like the better approach would be, if you want to be able to use any of those labels, is to just go straight to the ground.
Go straight to the ground, or use like cardboard boxes, or
Okay.
But going straight to the ground probably is your best, because I don't know, I can't tell you the plastic containers what it is. You can put it in a metal container, I think, but then with a bottom, because there's not a lot in the metal, but I don't know, to be honest. I don't know of a plastic that could say it's organic.
Okay, thank you.
I'll keep looking, and if I find anything, I'll pass it on.
Okay.
Desiree, you have your hands up?
Yes. As my colleague talk about plastic and mention plastic has prohibited substances, my mind ran off on those black water containers that people are now using to store water. So so I'm now looking at how safe are those black drums. Maybe I'm thinking too hard.
No, again, everything, it's a risk, right?
Yes.
If we think about things, we scan ourselves half to death. So of course the plastic containers. So now, right now they have a big problem going on with the kids' bottles and the plastic leaching out. It's high because there's so many chemicals that's used. It's not sustainable. It leaches chemicals, not a food safety risk. It's a long-term potential cancer risk that they have proven it to be. And so those black plastic, they probably contain that too, and it's leaching out. But it's, again, it's a long-term thing, and you have to use your common sense.
Okay.
So even they say we can use glass, but then glass causes another problem because it causes breakage. Like they went from the baby food to glass, and the glass causes breakage, and it causes even more hazard, immediate hazard from the breakage. So it's a tough thing.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah.
It's not safe down here.
Yeah. So you have to decide, again, like I said, like with GMO. Yes, there's a lot of things that we have to worry about GMO. But when I think about it, would I much rather save a whole lot of people from starvation? Or would I want to say, I don't want to use GMO because man created it, and I'm going to stay with my drought and my lack of food? It's just a question.
Yeah, just a question, and it's scary too, because I know you look at food production, and yes, you go GMO way. I'm thinking of like, I'm like, will they ever make one chicken with like 10 wings on top of it? I mean, provide chicken wing, like.
Now that is not the intent. You know what they will produce is a juicier chicken. Ethically, there's a lot of ethical requirements around using this, right? There's a lot of regulations around it. Does it stop a mad scientist from creating a chicken with 10 legs? I don't know. The only way we can guide it is like everything gets abused. How do I maintain the ethical pieces that goes to it? Because you're right, there's nothing to stop somebody from growing a chicken with 10 legs except the ethical requirements. Because they can do it, they can transfer the chicken, the technology is there, unfortunately. So the next time you see a chicken with 4 or 5 legs,
that came from a lab.
Yes. Although it can happen occur naturally because of natural process. You know, you have a lot of things that happen organically, but not as fast and as rapid as in the lab. Genetic mutation occurs naturally. A lot of the mutations you see occurred naturally, but they took time, right? People adapt. When you see, how do you think you adapt to, like people say that you become, the area is endemic of a certain issue. Like people in Africa don't suffer so much from yellow fever because they become inoculated with it. Their bodies have become used to it, and so they develop the resistance. That's a genetic modification. It just happens naturally over time. The difference is now scientists have expedited it. And you're scared because you think, oh my God, when does it stop, right?
Yeah.
When I was doing my genetic class, if you ever take genetic, it's a scary class. I swear to God, my genetic professor was making a baby in the lab. Because the things you would do, it gets so excited and it go in the lab and it say, we can move this gene there, and all of us was looking at them like, yeah, what's in that back room? You know, kids, it makes you wonder. Because genetics, if you think and you ever study genetics, it's unbelievable what you can do with the genetic makeup of people. And you get a mad enough scientist, yeah. But it's an interesting field. Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Observations? So let me ask a question. So what certification, food certification is required in SKN? So for those of us who make agro-processing or farming, or do you have to have any approvals from your government?
I don't have those. I don't have like farms and stuff, but I heard of like farmers permit and food handlers permit and things like that. But I don't know like about it, but heard of it that people will have to get those stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like those products.
Yeah. So I think this one is very common, the health certificate, the food handler. That is one a lot of the Caribbean and the other countries use, but it doesn't go far enough.
I don't really
It's not
think
enforced.
for the food handlers permit that is really regulated either. They say it is needed, but people could still
Yes, exactly. It's not, there's nobody to show. That's the whole thing. You have this process, but who's gonna verify it? You don't have the resources, you don't have the money, and somebody says there, but nobody's verifying it. No oversight. So we do the best we can, and that's where you guys come in, educating you on what it takes to make safe food and do your part is the best you can do. Think about it as farmers, you are feeding people food, and that you are going to do everything you can because you want the person to do the same thing to you, and you're going to use good practices to grow, distribute, and sell your food one at a time. Okay, any other question? Another great session, but I have to leave. Take care, everyone. All right, Teresa, you'll have a copy of the video. All right, so I know we have a number of agro processors, so I thought I would do, I normally don't do that, but because I was told we had a number of agro processors in the group, I thought I would do a little bit on HACCP. Now, agro-processing and in manufacturing, about the same with a slight difference. In agro-processing, maybe I'll let you guys tell me, what's agro-processing for those agro-processors? What does that mean to you? Anybody who's doing any agro-processing, are you willing to share?
Taking the produce and making it into something else, or like you have mango and you, what do you call it, puree it, yes, like things like that, I guess.
Yes, that is right on target. And so and most of the time you're doing it close to your farm. So you make guava and then you turn it into guava jam. Or you take the mango puree, you're taking your produce and you're converting it to another food. It doesn't go through the same extent like a regular manufacturer. So it's not taking corn and processing it so much and turning it into cereal. So that's mostly manufacturing, and that requires a number of steps. Agro-processing has a very few steps required, yes? And you're taking your produce, excuse me 1 second. So you're taking something from your farm and you turn it into another food. So it's for agro-processing. And like I said, it's different than manufacturing, and most of the time it's one ingredient and one product. Versus in manufacturing, you can take different ingredients, different product, and turn it into a processed food like cereal, okay? But you still have to have different requirements than you have gaps. So you follow all of your GAP principles, your good agricultural practice principles from the farm. And we talked a little bit about some of those when you go from farming to packaging. So HACCP, one quiz, tell me, what does HACCP stand for? I know you all know that, an easy one. What's the definition of HACCP?
Hazard analysis and critical control point.
Hazard analysis and critical control point. So you have the hazard, you have to analyze it, then you have to find a way, a critical control point to control the hazard. And HACCP is good, and it's very different. Well, not very different. It's slightly different than FSMA we talked about. FSMA goes about prevention. HACCP, in a way, it's after the fact, right? You look at the hazard, you have it, you control it. FSMA says you prevent the hazard. You control it, so you find a way to prevent it. HACCP say you find a way to control it, yeah? So thank you. It's hazard analysis, critical control. Next slide. Like I said, it's a systemic approach to the identification, evaluation, and control of food safety hazards. And what are the food safety hazards? Who remembers that? There's 3 of them. Anybody remembers the 3 food safety hazards? Come on, guys. Somebody remember?
Biological, physical, and chemical.
Biological, physical, and chemical. And that's what HACCP is controlling. Remember, we're talking about food safety, not quality. Next slide. It's not a standalone process, and we'll see, it's not just you go and you do this. It's like a roof, and you have a foundation of different, what we call prerequisites program that has to be in place to make a HACCP plan effective. Next slide. It covers all 3 of the hazards: biological, chemical, and physical. Hazard may be naturally occurring in foods. it can be environment, or you can make a mistake during processing and harvesting. So I'll give you an example. We had a big recall that lasted over a year of food. We had a screen in the processing line, and the screen was a certain size, and it was designed to prevent foreign material, like metal, shavings, and equipment pieces from getting to the final food. Now, at the end, there was no metal detection at that line, unfortunately. So we had an operator, and he was trained in HACCP, and that's a few years ago. And he did what he was told. So when we went back and looked at his documentation, he did what they told him to do. So every day he would come, he started off, there's a small hole in the screen, and he would sign off. Unfortunately, he didn't have anybody else to go back behind him and stop it and check, which is now in place. And then he would write a few weeks after, the hole is getting bigger, and so on and so on, and nobody checked anything until they had a massive recall, and they went in and checked. And then the last, it's not funny, but at that time, his last input on his log was, there's no more screen. And so that whole time, this equipment was supposed to be preventing the screen, preventing the foreign material to go in. It didn't, because the guy, he documented it, but he never took action on it. So that was a mistake. Now people are more advanced, so you have people checking the checker, and the requirement is that you will do it on a short period of time, not so you don't have a whole year of people getting sick. Next slide. It focuses on preventing a problem that could lead to a foodborne illness. So you identify the problem, and then you focus on it. You can apply it throughout the food chain from farm to table, but at farm, you're talking about GAP, and at table goes on, and apply to manufacturing settings. So remember I said agro-processing and in manufacturing, it doesn't really apply to the farm. It applies mostly to agro-process and manufacturing. Agro-processing, it's not as intense because you have a smaller process. You're converting just one food into another, versus in manufacturing, you have multiple steps in your process. Okay. Now, a big part of HACCP is called a prerequisite program. It's a range of programs that's necessary to set the stage for HACCP-based system and to provide ongoing support for the systems. And so the thing about prerequisite, what you have to do first for that program to be effective. Because if you have the best program, like I told you in the metal case where the screen wasn't there was no prerequisite program to check, so then it failed. So prerequisite programs become critical. Next slide. So here's some examples of prerequisite program. And if you are doing agro-processing, your facility has to be in place. You have to have, and I know in the islands that they do a lot about facility approval, where they have the rules for it, but they don't enforce it. Your production equipment, all the GMPs we talk about, cleaning and sanitizing, chemical control, pest control, personal hygiene, training, supplier control, specification, traceability, all of those programs have to be in place. If you are in agro-processing, not all of them, because your process is smaller. If you are manufacturing outside processing, agro-processing, and I don't think any of you guys are in manufacturing. I think most of you are in agro-processing. So a few of those would apply. Facility have to be kept, your packing house have to be kept in place, your pest control, your chemical control, cleaning and sanitizing. So some of those apply, but not as much. Specifications, maybe you don't have to worry so much about it. Traceability, not so much. if you're in agro-processing. Supplier control, you are the own supplier, so you don't have to worry about it. Unless you're buying jars or buying it from somebody else. So that deals indirectly with food safety issues. So it's not a direct food safety issue. If you don't deal with it, it will cause a food safety issue. It can grow across multiple product lines, and in a prerequisite program. Now that's important. It doesn't necessarily result in a food safety hazard. So if I don't have a proper moisture control and I have mold in my facility, it's not a good prerequisite program, but it will not lead necessarily to a food safety hazard. It's not a critical control point. If you have a prerequisite program where it fails and it leads into a food safety hazard, then that's where a critical control point comes into place. The hazard plan deals solely with those issues. They are specific to products and lines, so you can't have one size fits all. And any deviation that you've encountered or identified will lead into a potential food safety hazard. Like the guy did not say that the screen was broken, it led to a food safety hazard, right? So that's the big difference. The prerequisite programs may lead to a food safety problem if there's a failure, but not necessarily. But they can weaken your hazard plan. Now your hazard plan, you've identified the hazards that if they fail, will definitely lead to a potential food safety issue. And those are the ones that your hazard plan is all about. Next question. Next slide, sorry. So some examples and hazards under control is glass from a light fixture is a hazard. Remember, if the glass breaks, then people can get glass in their food. That leads to a safety. And two things you can do for glass: shatterproof light shields, or shatterproof lights, or people put regular shields on it if you don't have something. But that's control. Metal fragments from equipment. Remember, I told you the guy was now checking the magnet. He was checking the screen, but he wasn't documenting it. And at the end, when it failed, there wasn't a critical control point to identify that it failed because there was not a metal detector to tell the operator that the metal was going through. So a lot of companies, the bigger companies, are putting metal detectors now for that reason. And the smaller companies are using magnets. So in case your equipment fails, the screen, the magnet, or a metal detector are controls. Next slide. Prerequisite programs. Those are the key steps: education and training, developing a hazard plan. Now, if you are in a place where you are going or need to develop a hazard plan, you cannot do it by yourself. You need a team. And one of the things that I find a lot of the Caribbean islands suffer from is they don't have a microbiologist available to them to help them identify microbial hazards or physical or chemicals. They don't have a scientist online or available. And unfortunately, I find there's a lot of consultants that's charging a lot of money. There was one guy, some consultant charged him like $6,000 US to develop a hazard plan. When I looked at it, it wasn't worth the paper it was written on. So you have to be very careful about that. One of the things I offer as part of Helen's Daughters, if you are developing a hazard plan, because you've taken that class, you have free consultation with me, and I will do your microbiological hazard for you free of charge. If you already have one, I'll look at it. If you want to develop one, I will do that for any member who will sign up for that class. Okay, next slide. So again, you have to have the HACCP team, you have to describe the food it's distributed and its distribution, you have to do the intended use. So one reason that is important, if you are designing food for kids, that's very, very specific. You have to say what it's for. If you are designing food for that is not designed for adults, you have to be able to know that as well. You need to develop a flow diagram which describes your process. That sounds easy, and it can be, but it can also be complicated because your flow diagram has to start from incoming all the way to transportation. And then you have to verify the flow diagram. Next slide. Next click. And so those are the 7 HACCP principles that you need to be aware of if you are going to do the HACCP document. Is you have to conduct the hazard analysis, and that's hard if you don't have the technical expert. Determine the critical control point. So once you've identified the hazard, what is your critical control point? If it's a boiling step, how do you verify that the boiling step is good? If it's a metal detector, how are you going to determine if you have a failure? And if you have a failure, what you're going to do with it? And then a monitoring procedure for how do you monitor? Remember in the case where the guy was monitoring the screen, but documenting it, but not having a corrective action. So you want to make sure that does not happen. You have to have verification procedures in place. So in God we trust, everybody show paper. If you put it in there, you need to verify it's doing what it was supposed to be. And again, record keeping. So that's a quick summary of your HACCP implementation step. It takes a lot of work. I am aware of that. And it takes a team. So you can't do it by yourself, or if you pay a consultant, be very, very careful what you're paying the consultant for. And again, that is, I put it on there because you guys have some agro processors and then people looking into becoming food manufacturers. So you're gonna need that. And again, it's not required if you exporting, importing locally, but that's if you want to sell your food to another market. Next slide. And we've come to the end. If you go back one more. No, go one slide over. No, go forward, sorry. I wanted to show the reference. One more. All right, so here I wanted you to guys pay attention. So a lot of the stuff I gave you in here, the references, you can find reference to a lot of the FDA and Food Safety Management Act for your information. And that link will take you directly to there. So with that, I have come to the end of what I had to discuss with you over the 3 days, the 3 sessions. I hope that each and every one of you have taken some insight, whether you are a student, whether you are a home farmer, a backyard gardener, whether you are just a mom making food for your kids, or whether you are intending to manufacture food and export, that you've learned something. And that as you go through the workshop, you can link it together and become a super farmer. And with that, unless there's questions and discussions and topics and challenges, I open the floor to all of you in the next 7 minutes. While you're doing that, I wanted to say a special thanks to Latoya for doing a great job keeping me on time and managing my slides. So thank you so much. You've been really good at this.
You're very welcome. Thank you much too for being so patient as I navigate Zoom.
Oh yeah, you can eat the food meal. You look really good at it. Better than me.
I'm getting,
Sheridan, you're welcome. Like I said, if you guys are tired, I know it's a long day, it was a lot to take in. We gave you a 6 months course in 6 hours. It's a lot, but it's intended just to give you a highlight, and then you can follow up on it. Okay. So don't forget to look to your, don't forget to use your journal. Take advantage of that. Use it from the food safety side. When you look at financial literacy next session, it's going to be a lot of information, but I find them a very useful information. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, ladies. Well, have a good night. Enjoy your evening. It's been
okay.
a pleasure to share that information with you.
Yeah, so before you leave, we really want to thank you for being our facilitator on food safety. I'm sure the group have learned a lot. Your presentations was well received, even though persons weren't asking a lot of questions. I'm sure they were intrigued, as food is always a major topic for conversations. Many of the attendees, as you can see in the chat, are also mentioning how appreciative they are of the information and how much they look forward to learning more. We want to let you know that you will be creating some voices as it relates to food safety, especially here in the region where we have quite a lot of food safety concerns and many persons tend to not pay much attention to it. We want to thank you again for being a part of this group for the 3 sessions that you presented on. It was an absolute pleasure working with you, and I know that we do look forward to collaborating in the future. Additionally, participants, please remember to take advantage of the offer of helping to revise, to look at, to better improve your HACCP plan. For those individuals who are also thinking about one, please utilize the resources for that. Please stay in touch if possible. And if you have any other new information that you'd like to share with us, please do not hesitate to forward so that we can forward to the rest participants. Once again, thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that. I'll stay on your chart. I share a lot of information that I find it, and then they'll put it in the group chat for you guys. And I will see you at your graduation.